This podcast is brought to you by DIA and Covance Patient Safety Solutions. Covance Patient Safety Solutions constitutes the drug safety and post-marketing business of Covance and is part of LabCorp, Inc. Covance Patient Safety Solutions provides process, technology, and consulting services to the life sciences industry and employs best-in-class strategies, technologies, and expertise that accelerates business, drives higher levels of performance, and fosters innovation. As part of the world's most comprehensive drug development company, Covance Patient Safety Solutions is dedicated to advancing healthcare through a designed-around-you experience and delivering solutions made real. In the U.S., regulatory oversight of the safety of prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, or devices does not end when a drug or device is approved and released into the consumer market. The practice of monitoring the effects of drugs and devices after they have been approved, especially to identify and evaluate adverse reactions that may not have arisen in clinical trials, is known as pharmacovigilance. The advent of accelerated pre-market regulatory pathways has also increased the importance of post-market pharmacovigilance practice for drugs and devices. In addition, automation is impacting pharmacovigilance strategy and practice. I am Chris Slawecki, Senior Digital Copy Editor for DIA. Our guest today is Dinesh Kashturil, Global Client Director for Covance Patient Safety. He joins us today to discuss the current state of pharmacovigilance and where technology may bring it in the future. Thank you for joining us today, Dinesh, and welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Great to speak with you. Look forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Dinesh. Our first question is, can you describe the current state of pharmacovigilance and more specifically the challenges that currently exist with automation?
If we look at where we are with pharmacovigilance today, we've made a considerable amount of progress really over the last 10 or 15 years. If you look back to where safety was, maybe in the early 2000s, where we were dealing with everything on paper, we've moved to a realm now where almost everything has become electronic, all the way from collecting safety data through processing it and submitting it to health authorities. We evolved from custom systems to now commercial safety databases and systems. So there has certainly been a fair amount of progress we've made in this space. As we look at it, some challenges have emerged and some other challenges have gotten magnified over this period of time. One is just the complex and divergent regulations that we deal with. And with health authorities evolving, there are some global standards, but there are also local regulations that global companies are having to comply with. Another part of pharmacovigilance we're seeing is a lot of the effort and the time in pharmacovigilance is spent really on creation of what we call ICSRs, or individual case safety reports, versus overall looking at trends and looking at large data sets. With the digital revolution that's happening, the amount of data that's become available has gone exponentially larger. And we now need to analyze and sift through much more data to do what we need done. The other aspects are, like I said, some of these data sources that we are dealing with, they have structured data, they have unstructured data, and all of this needs to be synthesized, crystallized, and then eventually made sense of to see if it needs to be reported to health authorities or not. And we in the safety space have been relatively conservative in adopting automation. If I look across industries compared to other areas, like, for example, the financial industry, I think in safety, we've been slower to adopt it, but that pace of change is now picking up as we try to put together all of these data sources.
Would you say that pharmacovigilance has been conservative in its application of automation compared to other functions in the clinical research process? In other words, compared to, say, biostatistics or preclinical type research, how would you describe the automation landscape of its use in pharmacovigilance relative to other areas of drug development and approval?
I would say broadly it's on par, but the pharmaceutical industry overall because a lot of what we do is so heavily governed by regulations and impacts directly patient safety and health, I think we look for a lot more data before we are able to bring in automations. The systems that we run across the board in biostatistics and safety, all of these functions today are run by systems, but to be able to perform activities with what I would say minimal human interface or interaction is really what I'm referring to broadly as automation.
May I ask you to summarize in, say, 2 or 3 sentences how you would describe the current state of automation in pharmacovigilance, first in the US and then globally?
From a regulatory perspective, and that's what's driving it, the EU, a lot of it is driven by what health authorities are requesting and requiring. The EU across the board is now requiring electronic submission of data. The FDA is also increasingly looking at the same. Post-marketing data is currently submitted electronically. And we believe that in the coming years, even for clinical trials, the FDA will be requiring electronic submission of data. So globally, we are seeing increasing use of or adoption of electronic submission as an example, with the EU almost having completely transitioned and the FDA being on the way there.
Are new processes and tools for collecting data enabling the collection of data that maybe we haven't been able to collect on paper before? And if so, can you provide examples of those types of data?
On a broader level, yes. I think typically how case processing had worked was companies collected safety information through either people calling in to report adverse events or sites calling in or physicians. And then it was processed through and then reported. With these large electronic data sources, patient health records, insurance records, companies are now able to ask questions and proactively are able to answer some of these questions without waiting for that safety data to come in. So a lot of these external large data sets, not just the company safety data, are areas that now we can leverage and look at.
What you just spoke of is a process improvement driven by technology. In what areas have you seen process improvements and technology improvements change the landscape for pharmacovigilance?
Try to answer it in two parts, Chris. One is just to broadly look at the landscape itself. And in my mind, when I look at the various areas where we've applied automation in pharmacovigilance, the first is what I would call basic process automation, where for certain manual tasks or functions, there have been custom systems built to automate the process, to collect maybe metrics, to get reports, dashboards, and that kind of automation. And this has been in existence for a while. The next path in the evolution is probably what I would call robotic process automation. This is where currently processing, which is done by humans, we are trying to either reduce or eliminate some of those manual tasks by having a bot or an agent perform that on our behalf. This is something that companies are now increasingly adopting. And for something like this to work, one of the prerequisites is that we look at our process and look at what streamline a process and then look to have a bot automate it. The next level is what's called cognitive automation. And there are some companies, and we collectively as an industry, I think we're beginning to scratch the surface of this. In the next few years, we should start seeing a lot more in terms of using technologies like natural language processing to be able to engage and interact. A system or a bot interacts the way a human would. And especially when something like cognitive automation can be combined with robotic process automation, I think we'll see significant savings and efficiencies. And the last point in the PV automation landscape is really artificial intelligence or AI. And this is where a system on its own with minimal human interaction is able to process through a safety adverse event that comes in, reported to a health authority, and a system that's able to self-learn through experiences, because as products are consumed by increasingly diverse people in diverse circumstances, you will have many new and unknown adverse events, and the systems are going to learn on the fly, if you will, and adapt to these. So artificial intelligence, the last step is, in my mind, the holy grail that all of us are working towards. And we are some ways away from it, but I'm sure in the future that we will get there. I wanted to lay that landscape to start with in terms of where the four areas, the four categories are. But really, process improvement is key to all of these, because unless we're able to define what our perfect process looks like, any amount of automation and artificial intelligence we apply won't yield us some of the benefits we are looking for. If we are in a manual, fundamentally non-efficient process, we will continue, even with automation, to be not as efficient.
What are some aspects of the future world of pharmacovigilance that you see? More specifically, relative to automation, how do you see automation changing the practice of pharmacovigilance in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
So really, while as an industry, we're working for true artificial intelligence to be able to automatically take in all this data, crunch it, and then tell us if there is a risk to the product or not, there are multiple practical PV automation that we are able to deploy on much shorter timescales, and that still can add significant value. And this is something that we're seeing even now, where we are able to really reduce the effort required to process cases while also significantly increasing the quality. And this is something that's really a key focus area, I would say, for PV departments. Safety case processing is probably the largest bundle of effort in a PV department. And some of these robotic and cognitive automation tools today are allowing us to reduce the effort it takes to process a case, while also improving both the quality and the compliance. And not just in case processing, I think opportunities also exist to be able to apply these efficiencies in what we call aggregate safety report writing, where we are looking at all the safety data for a product, whether it be over a quarter or over 3 years, and aggregating it and analyzing what the risk-benefit profile is. And even in that space, there are a lot of automations that we would be able to deploy, which are able to yield what I would call quick wins. So while we are working for the true AI, we don't need to wait for that 2 or 3 year term. There are still automations and benefits we'll be able to leverage on our way there.
Where do you see this field going?
I believe we are on the cusp of a fundamental change in safety as we look at it, because AI and automation are fundamentally going to change the way we work and do business. And a lot of us, as we look at this, robots, AI systems are increasingly going to be able to do a lot of the manual functions, aspects of safety data collection and processing. There will still, of course, be need for humans more in terms of analyzing data and interpreting it. But I do see a change in terms of the personnel and the people that we have, and needing to pick up skills for this new era that we are headed into.
More data science skills, more
Absolutely.
computational analytics skills?
Exactly. I think it's data science and computational skills to supplement the medical knowledge that people in the safety space have. And that, in my mind, is going to become a key aspect of it, because you would be using, like you said, data science and computational skills to be able to further augment medical knowledge.
Those are all my questions for today, Dinesh. I want to thank you very much for sharing your expertise on pharmacovigilance and safety with our listeners. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. Truly was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. For DIA, I am Chris Slawecki. This podcast was brought to you by DIA and Covance Patient Safety Solutions.